So my name is Brad Baldwin, and my partner is Louis Vasquez, and together we are Vasquez Baldwin and Family Incorporated. Um, we're a tax and accounting firm. We specialize, and we really love to do it in giving strategic tax planning advice for the higher net worth individuals and businesses that we encounter. So we have two locations, one in Irvine, one in Los Alamitos. We just opened up the Irvine one, and there you can see my our phone number, our office phone number, and then some various links and emails. So you know, I don't have a camera, so right there, that's me, and that is my wife, my beautiful wife Tammy, and our dog Cinnamon, and together we're a happy family, and we're one half of the family in Vasquez Baldwin and family. So my my title, I guess, is Paycheck Protection Program, right? Strategies for loan forgiveness. Um, my objective is not to teach you guys how to apply for forgiveness. That would be impossible in the time I have. But my overall one goal is just to present it to you, the broad picture of it all, and then to get you to really see that you want to have your forgiveness application handled by a competent professional. So where we're going to go today, I mean, first off, I'm going to talk about really quickly about the PPP and the other loans that are available in the CARES Act, and some of the interplay between the two. And then I'm going to talk about the PPP Basics, actually getting the loan. So if you guys don't have it yet, I'm going to just talk about how to get it. Then we're going to go into the changes made by the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act that was just passed about 2 weeks ago by the government. And then we're going to go into the forgiveness process. So like I said, I'm just going to give you a broad overview of the forgiveness process, because it can get, for solo agents and independent contractors, it's relatively straightforward. But for those with entities behind them, either corporations, S corporations, it can get kind of complex. It can get complex. Let me rephrase that. So I'm just gonna do a broad overview and then call you guys to action. So the PPP loan and the EIDL loans, those are the three loans that are available from the Small Business Administration in the CARES Act, right? So Small Business Administration, SBA, I'm just going to say SBA from now on. So one is the Paycheck Protection Loan. It's up to, it is 2.5 times the your average payroll in 2019, and that's for entities. It's 2.5 times the Schedule C net income, which is the profit and loss from a business form. And so it has gross revenues, expenses, and it comes down to net income. It's 2.5 times. It's actually that divided by 12 comes up with your average, right, monthly, and then times 2.5 gives you the amount. We'll go through that though. So the two other ones is there's economic injury disaster loan emergency advance, and that was up to $10,000. And then there is an economic emergency disaster loan, and that is a loan, and it's up to $2 million. The difference between the two, I mean, obviously 10,000, 2 million. The advance was a grant, and it's totally forgivable. You don't have to submit an application or anything. It's just a grant. They give it to you. But if you also get the Paycheck Protection Program loan, that grant is subtracted, the emergency advance is subtracted from the amount of your PPP that is ultimately forgivable. So basically, if you had $138,000 of PPP loan and you got an $8,000 emergency advance, then you would only stand to have a maximum forgivable amount of your PPP of $130,000. So those two, obviously, they have some interaction, right? And you can obviously get both of them. And the EIDL, the actual loan, you can also get that loan and the PPP loan, and they don't have any interaction, right? But that's an actual loan, and it's at 3.75% interest, and they give you 30 years to pay it back, and the interest is you don't have to start paying on it for a year after you get it, and but the interest does accrue from the time that you get funded for that whole year that you're not actually paying the payments. But it's a smoking deal if you can qualify for it. They had shut it down and they were only giving it out to agricultural businesses, but they have since opened it back up on Monday. They opened it back up to small businesses of every type. And that's small businesses, so that means that you have to have an entity behind you, either an S corporation or corporation. So the basics of the PPP for sole proprietorships and independent contractors, it's a little bit different when you apply for the PPP as an independent contractor or a sole proprietorship. It's actually pretty kind of more straightforward, right? So like I already had touched on, the maximum amount of the PPP you can qualify for is based off of your net income from the sole proprietorship form. It's line 31 of Schedule C in your individual tax return, and that it's just the profit and loss from a business form. And like I said, it's 2.5 times your average monthly net income. So that means you divide the net income by 12, multiply it by 2.5, and that is the amount of the PPP that you would get. 75% of the loan is automatically forgiven, but you have to apply for forgiveness. And that's the huge point right there. You have to apply, otherwise it's not forgiven if you don't apply. But if you do apply, then it's automatically forgiven, which is a little technicality, and I bet you anything it'll trip up some people. The other 25%, you can either you have to spend it on rent, utilities, or I mean, if you have a business mortgage, you can spend it on your business mortgage interest. You can't spend it on your principal. Most of sole proprietorships, independent contractors operate outside of a business, an actual business, so they operate from their houses. So you can't spend the money on home office expenses. They do not qualify. So I guess now it's a good time to say that, if you were looking into this and you get this loan, then maybe you want to rent a seat at one of your Keller Williams office locations. Also, you have 24 weeks to spend the money. So when you get funded, the clock starts in 24 weeks on the 24 weeks. For business entities, it's different, right? It's the business entities, S corps, and corporations. So it's based off of your 2019 payroll, which is it's your average. It's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, monthly salaries, in another way to say it. So at least 60% must be spent on payroll, and up to 40% can be spent on business rent and utilities or mortgage interest. So the businesses obviously have to apply for forgiveness to even be considered for forgiveness. Then again, you have 24 weeks to spend the money, and the maximum forgiveness in this case is reduced by two main factors, two calculations that I'll briefly touch on at that section of my talk. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, so now we get to talk about the Payroll Protection Flexibility Act. And so there's a lot of problems with the PPP as it was originally passed. So the government changed it with this Flexibility Act. And so they changed it and they made the 60% rule not be a cliff, it's a proportional allocation. So in the law as it was written before, the 60% sounded like a cliff, like you had to spend that or you wouldn't get any forgiveness at all. That's not the case. If you spend 50% on payroll, then you just get your forgiveness is reduced by a percentage. And so it's not an all or nothing test. And then originally you had 8 weeks to spend the money. That's been expanded to 24 weeks. If you got a loan pre June 5th, then you have the option of doing 8 weeks or 24 weeks. If you got it after June 5th, you only can use 24 weeks. They also just Wednesday released the revised application for forgiveness. So they released one, and it had it had 8 weeks all over it, right? All over the whole 11, 12 pages of it. They had 8-week covered period, blah blah blah. So they revised it, made it a little more simple, and revised it to be to have a 24 weeks and expanded some of the calculations. So, and also, originally you had 2 years to pay back the amount that was not forgiven. It's 1% interest in that case if you don't get it forgiven. But now you have 5 years to pay it back. So that's a great benefit also. So there are some limitations to keep in mind. Before the Flexibility Act, when it was 8 weeks only, it was really hard to spend the money that you had in the allotted time. So there was some creative ways around this, and so it was to hire more people in that 8 weeks, or give employees bonuses, or actually prepay them. That's kind of sketchy sometimes, but those were more applicable back when it was 8 weeks. Now it's 24 weeks. Now you can pretty much spend all the money basically just on payroll. And so some of the other considerations is that payroll, it's limited to a yearly average of $100,000 for your employees, right? So that's basically you divide $100,000 by 52 and then multiply it by the 24-week period. So multiply it by 24, comes out to $46,154. So you can pay your employees from this PPP a maximum of $46,154 for the 24-week period and be okay. You can't pay them any more than that. Owners and owners/shareholders, which they would be limited to their average yearly compensation in 2019, right? So it's however much they got paid in 2019 divided by 12 and multiplied by 2.5, which is a minimum, or I'm sorry, it's a maximum of $20,833. So everyone, the forgiveness, the aspect. So you've been funded, you spent the money over the 24-week period. Now comes the next step. And the next step is to apply for forgiveness. First thing is that you are responsible, and I've said it before in my talk, you are responsible. You have to submit a forgiveness application to have any forgiveness at all. So the process is that you submit an application to your lender reviews it, and then forwards it to the SBA, the Small Business Administration, which is the government agency in charge of this whole thing, giving out the money. And then they give the bank the final word, and the bank tells you. But the actual forgiveness application is a complicated mess. So they, like I said, they came out with one on Wednesday, a revised one that's supposed to be easier. It is a little bit easier as far as for sole proprietorships, independent contractors, but for business entities, it's still really complicated. And it's just typical government. They always do things the hardest way possible. So doing the application is just the start of the process. A couple slides ago, I went over real briefly, go over it a little bit more in detail here. So it's potentially a really long process. So within 3 months after either the 24-week period, either the 8-week period if you choose that, or the 24-week period. And it's if you get your loan, the last day that you can actually get funded or you can actually apply for it is June 30th. And so I guess they would be funding you. You have to go through an application, the approval process, right? So you would be funded in sometime in July, the first week of July maybe. but the absolute last day that you can spend the money is December 31st, 2020. So even if it's not a whole 24-week period, that the last day is December 31st of this year. So within 3 months after that, you'll submit an application for forgiveness to your bank. Your bank will have 60 days to review it and then submit it to the government, and then the government will have 90 days to issue a decision and pay it to the bank, and then the bank issues you their final decision about the forgiveness and says you're off the hook for this money. So loan forgiveness for sole proprietorships and independent contractors. So how does it work, right? So we already touched on this because it's really simple, actually. 75% of the loan is forgiven automatically, and the other 25% must be spent on rent and utilities, and then home office expenses, rent for your home office, and any expenses for your home office do not qualify. So a lot of people aren't going to be able to spend the extra 25%. That's not a problem. All you got to do is pay that back. There's no prepayment penalty or anything like that. All you have to do is pay that back, and then the other 75% is yours to keep. But you have to submit an application for forgiveness to have it be forgiven. So how does it work for business entities as corporations, right? Significantly more complicated. Yes, it is significantly more complicated. There are two calculations you have to go through, and they are possible reductions, limitations on the actual amount of the forgiveness that you can get. So the first one is the payroll reduction, and it's basically it's got to be reduced by the reduction in payroll. So that maximum forgiven amount is reduced by the reduction in payroll. If you have a reduction of more than 25% per employee. So basically, the process is you got to go through. You got to find out, okay, how much did this employee get paid on average per hour, and if you're salaried employees, it's per week. How much did they get paid in the first quarter of 2020, and then how much did they get paid during the 24-week period, and then did they get reduced? Did they have a reduction in their pay by more than 25%? If they did, then you have to reduce your forgiveness dollar for dollar by that. And you can just see that if you have a bunch of employees, it can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. So I have an example, and the slide before, I go through a little bit more of the rules, and then this slide is an example. I'm not going to go through that just for time's sake. The other forgiveness aspect of it, or the other reduction, to the forgiveness is the employee headcount reduction. And so the payroll reduction was a dollar for dollar reduction, and this employee headcount reduction is a percentage reduction. So it's basically the number of employees you had in the period from January through the end of February of 2020. That's on the top of the fraction. That's the percentage. And on the bottom of the fraction is how many employees you had during the 24-week period. And if you have any reduction, it comes up with it's going to be a percentage, and then that percentage gets applied to your PPP loan after the payroll reduction. And then you get the maximum forgiveness gets reduced by that. I'm not going to go into it. I have another slide giving an example. I'm not going to go into it right now for time's sake and for everyone's sake, because it kind of makes your head hurt a little bit. So this is my last slide, actually, and this is the call to action slide. So we want to be the people taking care of your forgiveness application. But if you don't go with us, we strongly urge you to have it handled by a competent professional. And so you can see here, if you haven't applied for the PPP, there's still $1 billion left, but you must apply before June 28th. I said that because June 28th is Friday, and the 30th is a Sunday, I think. and that is actually like the last date that a couple of the banks that we are our favored banks for getting the PPP loans for people. That is the actual last date that they have available. So we're not available to get any more PPP loans for anybody, and unless your situation is um, unique. But you can apply, and you must apply before the 28th. And then so we'll take a look at your in-depth. We'll take a look at your situation, an in-depth look, and create a plan so that you can get the maximum forgiveness possible. And that's starting at $500 for up to 3 employees, and it's $250 per additional employee. And that's not doing the actual forgiveness application. That's just you got funded for the PPP, and so we're going to take a look and we're going to advise you about how to spend your money. So that you can get the maximum forgiveness. Or, if you've got the PPP and you've been, it's been 4 weeks or something like that, we'll take a look at your situation and tell you, hey, these are the problems we see and these are the solutions, and implement them. And then the last thing is that, like I said, we will handle your forgiveness application. You won't have to worry, and it will be done completely correctly. And that's starting at $750 for 1 employee or a sole proprietorship, and it's $250 per employee if you have more employees than that. And so, that concludes it. Once again, my name is Brad Baldwin. My business partner is Louis Vasquez. Together, we're Vasquez Baldwin family. And thank you so much for listening.